So hi everybody, it's Rogue Week. Today's Monday and this Saturday I have two performances, my first two of five, and just like last year, I'm having some trials and tribulations with the live performance rig. Last year it was all about having a looping system that would work, or if I wasn't going to have that, working with the little tiny looper I had and some pre-recorded tracks, and I had this whole kind of convoluted setup worked out for getting some of that taken care of. But then at kind of the 11th hour, I did get my hands on the beautiful Roland RC600, but I didn't have a lot of time to really incorporate all its capabilities into the system. But after the Rogue Festival was over, I started exploring. It is a multi-track looper. It's also an audio interface, and that was important for really starting to simplify the rack here. The other thing was I got a better computer and got the updated version of the Hopverk pipe organ simulator software, and now I'm trying to further simplify and get the rig worked out to where it's a fairly straightforward, simple thing. So one of the problems I ended up having here, and what's going on this year, this keyboard here, the Studio Logic SL88, is a very versatile MIDI controller. This doesn't make any sound on its own. It's connected into the computer and pulls its sound off of Hopverk. It has a lot of capabilities in terms of the MIDI signals that it can send out and process. So I really have this keyboard doing a lot. And in the present setup, anytime I have to make any change at all, change to the effects processing, change to the voicing setup on Hopverk, anything like that, whether I'm just single keyboard or split keyboard, all of that requires a new program within the Studio Logic keyboard. It has up to 245 individual presets, each with 4 layers, but then there's like 100 parameters on each of those layers. This keyboard also is the junction point for my bass pedals and the MIDI output of the C200 here. The only reason this keyboard is still here is because I need it as a second keyboard to control Hopverk, and because it would require reconfiguring everything to not use its own sounds. In some of the pieces I'm playing, I'm still using the sounds off the C200, but eventually I want to get it all so that the sounds are all produced on the laptop, and I just have 2 MIDI controller keyboards to deal with that. So basically what happens here is this keyboard and the pedal keyboard's MIDI output goes into the Studio Logic keyboard. The Studio Logic keyboard is communicating with the computer. The computer is running Hopverk, and the sounds are produced, and then that's the RC600's audio, multi-channel audio interface is what translates those sounds into actual audio signal that can be amplified and heard. And then I can route through the looper or not. I've got 6-channel output on that. For now, I still have the sounds of the C200 also mixed into the RC600. So really, in terms of audio, the RC600 is kind of the central clearinghouse for everything. In reality, in just given how MIDI works, the difficulty I have, like I said, is that any change, if I want to change the organ registration, if I want to change the effects processor settings, if I want to change how things are routed, all of it, I have to change to a separate preset. And so for 6 songs, I'm using 54 presets because absolutely everything has to be changed here. So earlier this month, there's a piece of software that is an editor for the Studio Logic keyboard, and you can set everything right here with these 3 buttons and this dial, and you can spin around and scroll through all these screens and set everything that way. That is kind of cumbersome, but it comes with software to do that on the laptop. You can just mouse around, get it all set up, load it into the keyboard. So I downloaded the software to be able to do the editing of the presets onto the computer. And the first thing that came up is that this keyboard had the older firmware and that wouldn't communicate with the software. So I had to download that and got that all going. And then I could not figure out how to set up a program, a preset on the computer and then get it into the Studio Logic keyboard. I'm sure that's user error on my part, but also after that firmware download, after I downloaded to the new version of the firmware for the keyboard itself, it started freezing, and that is a problem that I did not have before with the old firmware. I mean, this thing was rock solid. I never had a problem with it. But now it freezes up in 2 places. Either when you first start it up, it stays frozen on the first preset and will not move from one preset to another, nor will it actually send anything out. You press the keys, nothing happens. So then you have to restart it. Well, when you restart the keyboard, it loses communication with the computer, and then I have to restart the computer. It also ends up sending a 127 volume control signal to the C200. And so then when I bring everything back on, this thing is loud as hell. And that ain't gonna work, so then I gotta reset that too. So in actual fact, if this were to freeze up during the performance, I would have to shut the entire setup down, reboot it, and that takes 3-4 minutes. The audience doesn't want to sit there for that, and I really want to avoid that scenario. I reported the freezing situation to Studio Logic. They're in Italy. They're basically part of the FITAR company. And they are claiming that this is the first report of instability with the new firmware. And the new firmware has been out for, I think 2 or 3 years now. Well, so their recommendation is to first try a factory reset. And if the factory reset fails for some reason, then I have to reload the firmware. And I have just 6 days to go before my first performance. I am a little reluctant to do that, but at the same time, I don't want this thing freezing up. If all goes well, at the very least, it won't be any worse. There is, of course, the potential for the whole scenario failing and me not having enough time to correct it. If it turns out that there's some sort of physical problem with the keyboard, then that could be a whole other issue. I don't know what I would do at that point. But I have decided after yesterday's rehearsal, this thing froze several times during rehearsal. It froze at a specific location in the preset sequence. It did that twice. On one of the reboots, it froze up at the start and then froze up again after rebooting at I think it's number 10 of the 5th song. And so I really have decided I have to at least try to correct that issue. And if I fail, I fail. If I succeed, yay. So I think that, let's talk about old people and technology, okay? I like to think I keep up with technology pretty well, but some things just don't make a lot of sense to me. And then I see young people who have grown up with this technology and they just go, oh yeah, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. And I'm like, what? It takes me a little longer. When I get a piece of software on the computer, it takes me a little longer to figure out how do I use that software and make this work out. So today I'm gonna try to set this up, and we'll see what happens. I remember my grandfather, who was born in 1903, being a little bamboozled by the telephone, if you can imagine such a thing. But if you think about it, when he grew up, the telephone existed, but it was, they existed in public spaces. You didn't have one in your house, and you just picked up the thing, put it to your ear, talked in the microphone thing, and you told the operator to connect you to a specific person, and then they took a cord and plugged it in, and then your phone was connected directly to that person's phone. There was no long distance, by the way, in that scenario. So that's actually why this is called a phone jack, because that's what it was invented for. But when he was an adult, married with kids in his 30s or 40s, that's when he got his first telephone in the house, and it was a dial-up, if you remember those. And I remember him just, it was like a mental strain. Okay, let's see. 2, 7, and as a kid who had grown up with the telephone, I just, and it used to frustrate me. But at any rate, let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect the keyboard straight into the computer. The way this is all configured, there's a USB hub underneath here on the interior of the setup. And the USB hub, go ahead and take it out here a little bit, has several things. There's this is the RC600 connection, and then this is the connection from the Studio Logic keyboard. This is the license dongle for Hotbird to allow me to open that software and use it. So this then goes to a cable that goes straight into the computer, so I only have the one USB connection on the computer. When I redid the firmware, all of this was hooked up, and I simply pulled up the firmware download, but so it had to pass through this hub. Now theoretically that shouldn't make any difference, and I'm sure you computer guys are either saying, well, yeah, you got to do a direct connection, or you're saying, well, no, that doesn't make any difference. In my own experience with electronics, the more direct you go in any given situation, usually the better it is. So at any rate, we'll set this back in place. And then this is the cable, the USB connection directly from the computer. So we will hook up the Studio Logic keyboard straight in. See if that makes some sort of difference when we get to downloading the software. Now, the first thing that has to happen, fire this stuff up, is I have to save all my presets into the software. And that's the first thing that's kind of scary for me, because I didn't really have any luck doing the editing directly on the computer and then loading it into the keyboard. I had to revert back for the new stuff that I'm setting up, going back onto this little tiny screen and these buttons and getting it done that way. But I think this just kind of forces the issue that I really need to figure out how to make this software work. So I am also going to use a mouse instead of the, it has that touchpad, but that doesn't really do everything. Nothing happened on the keyboard. And nothing happened here. So, in times like these, we turn to the great guru of the modern age, YouTube. So I went online on my other computer and looked up some information on how to use the editor here. And so it's interesting. It says sync in or sync out to transfer information from the editor and the keyboard. Well, does that mean sync in into the keyboard, sync out of the keyboard, or the other way around? So, I mean, I guess it makes sense that when you sync in, you're syncing from the keyboard into the editor, and that turns out, I guess, to be what it is, but I don't know. I tried it. It didn't seem to destroy anything on the keyboard here, so, and it looks like, well, we've got a whole list here, and it has at least the names and numbers and everything of my program files here. So now I should be able to do a factory reset as the factory suggested, and then be able to reload my programs back into the keyboard from the editor. I'm trying to maintain a sense of humor about all this because, you know, I do feel a little bit out of my depth working with this kind of stuff. You know, it's interesting that all of it is so different. You know, when I'm doing my work for the Rogers Organ Company and I'm working on the other day I was working on a new installation, and of course we're doing the same thing, right? It's all in a dedicated computer with sample files in there, and there's all these parameters you can edit to get the organ to sound right in the room that it's in. And I know how to do all of that because I've learned it step by step. But every system is different, and none of it feels intuitive to me. It's not something that I can look at and say, oh yeah, that's got to be what it is. At least not with any confidence anyway. And so I got to learn the nomenclature and everything for a particular system. And I know what the Rogers system does. Several trips to the internet and reading over the very vague instruction manual for the SL editor, I think I've figured it out how to get my program settings from here into the computer, save them in a file, and be able to call them back up in the editor software. At least that's how it appears. So, yeah, the coffee pot is brewing more coffee for me to get through all of this. You know, they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, you can. It just takes us a little longer. So it appears that I finally figured out how to get stuff out of the computer and back onto the keyboard. So apparently on the way this software is set up, the left side of the organized screen is stuff that you're working within the computer, and then the right side of the screen is stuff that's going in and out of the keyboard. So the trick was there's no instructions on how to get one thing from one side to the other. Turns out that it's basically a copy and paste. You simply copy what's on the left hand side over to the right hand side, and then you can put it into the keyboard. Now it appears that all of my programs with the correct settings are there and ready to be used. Did the factory reset clear up that freezing problem? I don't know. The only way I can figure that out is if I go ahead and set up and run through the music and see if I've actually solved that problem. So at any rate, I managed to figure out how to work the editor software a little bit. The next phase of that learning curve will be to figure out how to actually write all the setups on the computer screen, where it'll be easier and less cumbersome than doing it here, and transfer stuff back and forth, but yeah, little by little. So yeah, old dogs can learn new tricks. So at any rate, I'm gonna play some music today, and so for tomorrow's video I'll pull up and we'll take a look at how that's going and if we've solved the big problem here. Anyway, see you next time.